Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I'm Bob Allison. I chair the Rev 250 Advisory Group. We're a consortium of about 75 organizations in Massachusetts planning ways to commemorate the beginnings of American independence. And our guest today is Janet Uhlar. And Janet is actually a retired nurse, and she's devoting herself now to writing history. And her most recent book, I believe, is Liberty's Martyr, about Dr. General Joseph Warren.
Yes, actually, that was my first book and originally published in 2001.
Wow.
And then not reprint, a second edition came out in 2006. And now I have updated it, and it is due to come out in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
I was hoping it was out by today, but it's not.
Yeah. And tomorrow, of course, it commemorates the Battle of Bunker Hill, where Dr. Warren was one of the casualties.
Absolutely. He was a martyr for liberty, actually. Yeah. And those contemporaries and historians at the time did refer to him as that, in fact. Yeah.
Yes. So what drew you first to Dr. Warren?
I was in elementary school, and we were told the first day of school, whoever read the most books was going to get a prize. And I ended up reading the most books. Mm-hmm. I do not remember the prize or any of the books except Johnny Tremaine by Esther Forbes.
Oh, wow.
And so, of course, she introduced my young mind to the pre-revolution in Boston. And I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts, so I recognized most of the names of the historical characters she portrayed, except for Dr. Joseph Warren and, strangely enough, Josiah Quincy Jr.
Wow, you didn't recognize that name.
No, so they were two that I kept in the back of my head, never heard their names mentioned again throughout my education. Wow. And it wasn't until I was a pioneer homeschooler, and my two oldest children were hitting the high school grades, and we did biographical sketches of forgotten heroes, and started with Warren and Quincy. And it actually was my daughter, and she said, "Mom, you need to make them come alive. You need to write a book." And so
wow. What a great story. And it's strange to think of someone as important, as interesting as Warren being so forgotten for so long.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of what had happened was Longfellow's poem on Paul Revere. Right. Put Warren in the shadows and brought Paul Revere out. But you're exactly right, because quite honestly, in my estimation, I think many would agree, in the weeks prior to the Lexington and Concord, and up until his death at the Battle of Bunker Hill, Warren was the most prominent patriot leader. I mean, he was it.
Yes.
He is the one that ignited the war by sending the militia out to Lexington and Concord, and then holding everything together until his death.
Yeah, it really is to read about those weeks and see how involved he was in everything. He's head of the Provincial Congress Committee of Safety. I mean, he is the guy doing all of this.
And according to his early biographies, back in 1856, I think it was, and then 1964, he didn't seek out those positions.
No.
They came to him and kind of talked him into, taking them. Right.
Yeah. Right. He was a doctor, and there's that wonderful painting of him by Copley, which shows him with both things looking at you as though he's consulting you about your ailments.
That's true. Yeah. And he was one of the most prominent doctors in Boston at the time of when the war broke out.
Yeah. So how does he get involved then in this political life?
I think if you really study it, I have a series of little articles I'm doing on my website and Facebook. Why Massachusetts? Why was Massachusetts the focus of Great Britain for 10 years before Lexington and Concord?
Yeah.
And part of that answers the question you just asked, was even the land bank scheme And not only Warren's grandfather was invested in that and lost a great deal of money, as did Samuel Adams's father.
Right,
so
right.
The two of them had that in common when they did meet, and they both attended the same church, the Brattle Street Meeting House.
Mm-hmm.
And Samuel Adams heard, Warren speaking in his thoughts on the parliamentary acts, but also found out that he was speaking to his patients about it.
Right. Yeah.
So he kind of brought him into the fold, and Joseph Warren became Samuel Adams's protege.
Yeah, and he was extraordinarily articulate, both in speech and in writing. And we have these wonderful, devastating satires he's writing in 1767 to 68 about Governor Bernard.
Oh, yeah. That was kind of, I'm sure, uneasy in the end when he was charged with profanity, and I'm sure he didn't mean it, but it's kind of comical to read him trying to get out of that hole he found himself in.
Yeah. And he is the only one who gives the Boston Massacre oration twice. This is the commemorative oration that the town began after the Boston Massacre, and he gives the one in 1775, actually, when Boston is occupied, and the British are hoping to spark something, that he'll say something that will cause a riot. They can then act.
He didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
He contained himself. But even the first one that he gave, it was supposed to be John Adams that gave that, and John Adams turned down the opportunity.
Right.
And Joseph Warren stepped up and did it in his place. And of course, the 1775 oration, it took a lot of courage.
Oh, right. Yeah.
To get up there and do it at that time. And he was even threatened. One of the British officers went up to him and held out a hand filled with musket balls, we're told. But it didn't stop him. He just kept speaking. And he was a very courageous man. But I think, Bob, part of, what I wanted to talk about also, on top of all he accomplished, was, and this is a good point to maybe interject it, was his Masonic connection.
Oh, right. Yes. Because that's the reason there's a monument, is because the Masons wanted to commemorate their late Grand Master.
Yes. It's very interesting. And of course, for 30 years now, I've been looking at it and not thinking much about it myself. And it just has really hit me this past year in looking at what he accomplished that nobody else could accomplish in Boston. Just the fact that he gave that oration when there was an arrest warrant being held by General Thomas Gage at the time.
Right.
And he walked away from it and nobody touched him. If you start studying the fact that Warren could stay in Boston unmolested until the absolute last minute, we're talking the morning of April 19th.
Yeah.
And go on a public ferry to get out of Boston. He didn't even sneak out of Boston. He went on a public ferry. Nobody touched him. He had, and I am sure the British knew, called out the militia the night before to face them in battle.
Right.
And wasn't touched. And the only thing that makes any sense for his protections was his Masonic position.
Interesting.
And when you follow through on who he was within Freemasonry in America, it's astounding. And it's astounding nobody has researched that,
Interesting. It's very interesting. And of course, there were Freemasons among the British, too. Right. And it is a brotherhood. Politics and war are things that are less important than the brotherhood we as Masons.
Yeah. Well, the thing was with Warren, he went into Freemasonry the same night that Paul Revere did. And that's probably where they first met. Paul Revere was 6 years older than Warren. And then that was in 1761 while he was a medical apprentice. Then he attends occasionally lodge meetings, and then he's not attending at all. And he doesn't come back into the lodge meetings at St. Andrews in Boston until 1765, which is an important year.
It is a very important year, yeah.
So all of a sudden he's back in. very active.
Mm-hmm.
And within a couple of years, he becomes the Grand Master of St. Andrews. Then within a year of that, he petitions the Grand Lodge in Scotland to be named the Grand Master of Boston and within a 100-mile radius of Boston. They give him that, and then he turns around and in 1772, he petitions in 71. He gets the title in 72 of Grand Master of North America.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Now that had to have meant something, or he would not have sought out that title.
Because there were other Masonic lodges in North America at the time. So is he Grand Master of all of them? Are they all connected now?
He is Grand Master of the ancient lodges, which were established through Scotland. But I can't get much information because nobody seems to know anything. I've even applied to the Grand Master in Scotland to get information. But the thought is that he still would have been respected by the English established lodges. So and he also attained the 3 degrees that were available at that time. So my thoughts on it are that this position and having attained the 3 degrees, that no British officer who came to Boston who was a Mason was above him as far as degrees go, and he was above them as far as his positioning went as Grand Master of North America. For instance, what I'm seeing is not only that he stayed in Boston until after he sent the militia out to face the British, he would meet with Gage on a regular basis to discuss things going on between the troops and the townsmen.
Wow, interesting.
Again, Gage had the arrest warrant, never acted on it.
Yeah.
Why were John Hancock and Samuel Adams in Lexington? Because there is an arrest warrant and they were hiding. Warrants right in the middle of Boston, obtaining information, staying until the last possible moment. And not only that, even after he leaves Boston, on June 12th, Gage sends word over to him that the king has approved of an amnesty for anybody that will lay down their arms. They are welcome back into the fold. And the only 2 that it did not pertain to, Gage told him, was Samuel Adams and John Hancock. But yet Joseph Warren, who actually ignited this whole thing, was welcomed back in the fold.
Interesting.
What other explanation? I just don't know.
That's something really to ponder. I mean, we're talking with Janet Uhlar, whose book is, one of her books, which we're talking about right now, is Liberty's Martyr, about General Joseph Warren, Dr. Joseph Warren, recently done with new stuff. You've been researching this again for a quarter of a century now since it first came out, and it came out in a timely fashion now, commemorating the 250th anniversary of Bunker Hill. So let me ask, when Warren does leave Boston, where does he go?
He initially just kind of went over the river and met with, I think it was the Committee of Safety at that point. Then he actually took part in the battles Lexington conquered when the British were returning to Boston. He was very active in the battle.
So he's a political figure. He does get a commission in the Continental Army. It hadn't arrived at the time of Bunker Hill. So how is he then? Is he also a member of the militia, either in Boston or in Roxbury?
Well, he was president of the illegal Massachusetts Provincial Congress. He was chairman of the Committee of Safety. He was trying to organize a military hospital. He was just up to his eyeballs in everything. And the only position he actually sought, he didn't seek those positions. He was, recruited kind of. But the one that he sought was to be a general of the Massachusetts militia. And in thinking on that and in discussing that with some military people, I can't help but wonder if the reason he did that was to hold things together. He had been writing to his friends in Philadelphia, Samuel Adams, to appoint a commander in chief. He even suggested George Washington, but he's trying to hold everything together with the provincial army, the ragtag army. It's not even, it's the ragtag army.
Yeah.
And he's not certain he can. In one of his letters to Samuel Adams, he expresses that, and he seeks this position, this commission as Major General. And from what the military folks have put forward was that they felt he had to, at that point, to lead, to hold it together while waiting, you know. So whether he would have sought that if Congress had acted sooner, don't know.
But then he and at least the Adamses see that Washington is really the guy. And we know that Peter Oliver, who's on the other side, later says that if Warren had lived, no one ever would have heard of Washington. Do you think that's true?
That's interesting. I think Washington would have always led the army, you know. When I think about it, I think that maybe Warren would have stayed within the army because he had the commission, and then moved over to the Continental Congress in order to get more attention to the army. I mean, the army at the point of Valley Forge, it was just ridiculous that they went into Valley Forge in that state. And I could see Warren switching over. And I think, of course, this is all, I think the war would have ended a lot quicker because Warren would have made sure that the Continental Congress was properly supplying the army with clothing and food and, I mean, basic stuff, you know? Now, he may have become the first president because of his prominence within. He was known throughout the colonies.
Yeah, he was.
And not only because of his patriotic stand, but because of his Masonic title. He was known. There's no other reason to have that title if you're not going to be known throughout North America. So I think he may have been the first president, really. Yes.
Okay. Another question that always comes up, we were saying earlier that Longfellow's poem has Paul Revere telling his friend, and we know Warren is the one who called Revere and Dawes in and said, we know the British troops are leaving, and he's the one who sent them on this mission. How did he know that the troops were on the march?
He had people that were telling him things in Boston. He had, I don't know if it was a spy system, but he definitely had people that were informing him. And there's never been any conclusion as to who gave him that particular information. People have speculated. And I thought I saw something just recently. Jay Bell came up with something on that, which was very interesting. So again, nobody knows for sure. And my understanding was that Warren said he would take the identity of that person to his grave. And he, in fact, did.
He did. Okay. We're talking with Janet Uhlar, whose great book is Liberty's Martyr, about General Joseph Warren, a figure who really deserves to be more remembered. There are a lot of places around the country named for him.
There are a lot of counties. There are schools named for him. From what I've read and come across, his name was known by every school child for about a century, and his heroic act on Bunker Hill or Breed's Hill. But when Longfellow's poem came out, it kind of switched it out.
And then Emerson's poem is all about the embattled farmers at Lexington and Concord. But there's a statue of him on Bunker Hill, and there's also one in Roxbury. Well, it should be in Roxbury. It was across from where his home was. And then there's a really interesting story about how it was spirited away to Roxbury Latin School about 20 years ago. So,
because he taught there for a year at Roxbury.
So let me ask then. So Warren he's a widower at the time of the
Yes.
battle, and he has young children. And then what happens to his children and his family after this?
From the old biographies, it's put forth that his mother took care of his children after their mother died, Elizabeth Warren. She was only 26 when she died. They had 5 children together. One child died in infancy. And when Lexington and Concord started, the kids were ranged in age from about 1 to 9.
Wow.
So his mother lived in Roxbury, and they had a family farm there in a large orchard, and she took the children to the farm. Now, for some reason, in early April of 1775, he wanted the children to be away from Boston. He actually made arrangements with a colleague of his, a doctor, Elijah Dix, who lived in Worcester, like that 30 miles from Boston.
Yeah, something like that.
And he arrangements to have his children sent to Dix's home secretly. And a woman by the name of Mercy Scully, who was the daughter of one of the Boston selectmen, John Scully, who was a good friend of Warren's, and the family were actually patients of Warren's. She went along with the children to oversee, their care while they were under the care of Dr. Dix. Yeah. So the children were there when he actually was killed in the battle.
And do they stay then with Mercy Scully, or do they go back to Warren's mother afterwards?
Mercy Scully, it's from Mercy Scully's letters, which were just realized. I don't even know exactly when they were realized, but by 2012. There are a number of letters in the Cambridge Historical Society by Mercy Scully. And she, within 2 months' time of the death of Joseph Warren, is writing these letters. And in these letters, she tells us that Joseph's mother had gone out to Worcester to check on the grandchildren. So this is within 2 months. So who knows how quickly she was able to do that. And she had determined that she was going to take the grandchildren back to Roxbury. And Mercy Scully, in relating this story, is upset that the grandmother is going to take the children. And she's indicating that she has custody, she herself, Mercy Scully, has custody of the children and is actually making this issue public. Now, mind you, this is within 2 months of Warren being tragically killed at Bunker Hill, okay? She's making it public by going to John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Reverend Cooper, and I forget, John Adams, I guess, was in there, and asking them to back her in keeping these children and not letting them go back to their grandmother and uncles. And they tell her, according to her own letter, that only a judge could make that decision. If the family wanted these children, that it was up to a judge. There is nothing to indicate she ever took any of this before a judge, but she tried to keep these children. You can see through her letters writing to John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Benedict Arnold, that she's trying to keep custody of these children. And the family is they let her have access to the children because I think she loved the children. They weren't trying to be cruel, but legally these children were theirs, and they loved these children.
Oh yeah. Now were she and Dr. Warren engaged?
There is absolutely nothing that states or supports that they were engaged.
Okay. Interesting.
Mhm.
Interesting. It's interesting. And actually, when Benedict Arnold does turn to the other side, says one of the reasons is he doesn't think Massachusetts had provided for the Warren children.
Yeah, it's that's very interesting
Yeah.
too. Massachusetts and the delegates to the Continental Congress from Massachusetts, again, a historian has to take circumstances
Yeah.
into
Yeah. Yeah.
account. All
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
They had been out of their homes in Boston until the British evacuated,
Yeah.
which it wasn't until 1776, March.
Yeah.
So here they are coming back into their homes, getting settled in.
Mm-hmm.
The Continental Congress is up to their eyeballs in what they're doing. John Hancock, John Adams, they're trying to draft a Declaration of Independence. And you see Mercy Scully in her letters putting down these people or petitioning John Hancock in May of 1776, a 7-page letter petitioning him to help her get custody of the children. Now, I think these guys had a little bit on their minds.
Right, yeah.
And it wasn't that they wanted to neglect these orphans they needed to deal with what was right in front of them. Mm-hmm. And then they did get to it. They made sure these children were taken care of. And it was within a couple of years of Warren's death that they passed these things for these children.
Yeah.
They were not neglecting these children. They were dealing with it in a timely fashion as they were facing enormous crises.
That's true. Yeah. And it does, it raises the question when they say you have to find a judge. You think, well, in 1775, it was unclear which legal system we're using because the existing government had essentially collapsed, and we haven't yet created a new one. So,
And the other thing about that was she did mention Reverend Samuel Cooper as one of the ones that said she needed to go before a judge. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is Samuel Cooper, 2 months, he ran into Mercy Scully and the 2 Warren daughters in August of 1775. And he journals. He had a journal of his daily events. Mm-hmm. And in his journal, now let me back up a minute. Reverend Cooper was the minister of the Warren family. Mm-hmm. Joseph Warren had been attending Reverend Brattle Street Church for years and years and years. That he got married there. He buried his wife out of there. Okay.
Yeah.
So Reverend Cooper mentions in his journal that he had, I think they had dinner together with Mercy Scully and the 2 young daughters of General Joseph Warren. Mm-hmm. He didn't specify Mercy Scully had any particular position, but he did specify that these 2 girls were the children of General Joseph Warren. Mm-hmm. And Reverend Cooper was literally with Joseph Warren. Warren made him the chaplain of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. Mm-hmm. And then Reverend Cooper was actually on Bunker Hill. Mm. Okay. So up until the last minute, Warren had contact with his minister. Right. Mm-hmm. And Reverend Cooper never came forward and said, oh, yeah, Mercy Scully, she's engaged. She's betrothed to him. Mm-hmm. There was never any such statement made. It was only Mercy Scully kind of putting this stuff out there. Mm-hmm. The other thing is what we have to understand in looking at this clearly and fully is that Mercy Scully was 34 years old. Mm-hmm. She had never married. She was living with her parents. All her sisters had married. She had not. Living with her parents, and we know that she had some sort of a disability because she used a cane. She talks about it in her letters. Mm-hmm. So this is a woman who would be probably considered a spinster at the time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was a reason, that you would be a spinster. Not that it was nice or whatever, but yeah. And Warren's own brothers, Eben and Samuel, made a comment that's talked about in the letters that they thought she was trying to keep custody of the children, basically because she had a ready-made family there. a
Hmm.
family that she probably would never have.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking with Janet Uhlar, author of Liberty's Martyr, a biography of General Joseph Warren. And why don't we talk then a little bit about Bunker Hill and what brings him there and what happens on that tragic last day of his life?
Well, what brought him there was because he had been inspiring the men that ended up going there for
Hmm.
10 years
Yeah.
through writings, through
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
He had applied for a commission to be Major General of the Massachusetts Forces,
Hmm.
which was granted on, I believe it was June 14th, so just a few days prior.
But he
But
didn't know it. He had gotten it,
yeah,
actually.
well, it wasn't officiated yet.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
part of the reason it wasn't officiated, which is interesting, is that he was president of the provincial Congress.
Hmm.
And it was the president of the provincial Congress that would officiate it, that would
Wow.
commission these officers. And they didn't have a president. It was like in this
Yeah.
lapse. And also, on a side note of that, John Adams is quoted as talking about Warren commissioning officers. And then when he gave the commission to officers, he had everybody shaking, not just the officer being commissioned, but everybody in the
Really,
assembly, John
really.
Adams claims. So it must have been a very,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so nobody was there to officiate him.
Hmm.
So he went up as a volunteer.
Hmm.
He had entered the redoubt later in the day. And it's interesting to go through his last few hours before dying at Bunker Hill. The night before, he had been in Watertown because he was that was the provincial Congress, as
Right.
president of Congress, overseeing a meeting there. He's then said to have gone to a wharf in Boston, so had taken a rowboat or had some people row him
Interesting.
over, no details on it. But he met a fellow physician in Boston in secret at around midnight, according to this fellow. And he was trying to persuade Dr. Jeffries to become Surgeon General of the military hospital.
Yeah.
And they were very close friends. And John Jeffries told him no, he wouldn't do that. So
Jeffries remains loyal to the crown.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But they both trained under the same physician and they were very close.
Yeah.
So Warren goes back, gets a couple of hours of sleep in Watertown. So, according to Elbridge Gerry, he slept next to him for a few hours. And then there is a record of a woman in Newton being in labor, and that he was summoned out to attend this woman in labor in Newton. He didn't deliver the baby. He left, and basically the story is that he told her he would come back to see how things turned out and whether another physician had stepped in or what happened. So we don't even know how much sleep he got that night. He was called out to attend this birth. Then he went to Cambridge to oversee a meeting of the Committee of Safety. He was chairman. He had a headache at this point. He said he needed to go lay down to try to get rid of this headache. He lay down. That afternoon, one of his former apprentices had come into Cambridge and was looking for instructions of where he should go to take care of the wounded. And he accidentally woke up Warren. They walked to the hill together, and then Warren went into the redoubt just before the first attack.
Who was his apprentice? Was that William Eustace, or was it someone else?
It was David Townsend.
David Townsend. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. And so then he is there. I mean, he could have been anywhere, but he is in this first redoubt that's going to get the brunt of the British assault up on Breed's Hill.
And even on his way there, when he met Israel Putnam is saluting him, asking him for his orders, for Warren's orders. And Warren said, I have no orders to give. My commission isn't official. And the same when he got to the redoubt and he was greeted by Prescott and asked what his orders were. And he said, I came as a volunteer. So, yeah, he was right there with the men throughout. At the end, when the British realized the Americans were out of lead and powder, and they were coming over the wall of the redoubt, Warren volunteered to take a sword to stay and fight hand-to-hand combat, so the colonists could try to make a retreat. And that's probably he was stabbed. Some colonists said they saw him; he was already bleeding from his side. And then he was shot in the face after that.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Wow. And then, of course, the British occupy the hill, so the Massachusetts folks can't get his body or the bodies of the other men who died.
No.
So what happens then?
He was buried in a grave, we know, with an older farmer in a frock coat. His body was exhumed at least once. For General Howe to view it. And actually, it was at that point, see what had happened is Warren had left Boston prior to reinforcements, British reinforcements coming to Boston. He knew General Gage personally. He had never met Howe or Clinton or Burgoyne. And Howe, my understanding is Howe could not understand why Warren was in that battle. I mean, he was the president of the provincial Congress and all that. So he demanded to see Warren's body. And because Warren was disfigured, because he took a bullet in the cheek, he insisted, and we'll go back to the name we said earlier, that Dr. John Jeffries, who was there tending to the wounded on the battlefield, General Howe insisted that Jeffries come and identify the body. And so it was Jeffries that did make that identification, not only from just knowing him and maybe being able to recognize him even still, but because Warren had the tip of one of his thumbs missing, and Jeffries knew that. He knew he had a false tooth, so he could identify him. And then John Jeffries made certain that he memorized where the grave was, this mass grave. And it was after he had told one of his own apprentices, John Jeffries did, where the body was. And it was this apprentice, a Dr. Hill, who notified the Warrens after the British evacuated of where the grave was, so they could find him.
Wow. And he is now buried in Forest Hills
That was kind of a migrating corpse for a while there. Buried in a few places, but now, in Forest Hills.
We're talking with Janet Uhlar, whose book is Liberty's Martyr, about General Joseph Warren, who had a short but very eventful and very productive life, which ended on June 17th of 1775 at Bunker Hill. He'd also lost his father at a young age.
He did. He had just entered Harvard and entered at the age of 14, which didn't mean he was an absolute genius. That was the average age when the young men entered Harvard. And as I said earlier, they had an orchard, an apple orchard of about 90 acres. And his father was picking apples, very big trees, and he fell off the ladder and broke his neck.
Wow. Well. So, Janet, you've wrote the book on Warren, you've revised the book on Warren, you've also written a book about Nathaniel Greene, and you're doing many other things. What is the one thing you would like people to know about Joseph Warren?
Just to realize that he was the most prominent leader, that his role was vital. And quite honestly, I mean, even going back a little bit before he called out the militia, he's the one that wrote what's called the Suffolk Resolves.
Right.
And the Suffolk Resolves, he wrote and sent to Congress via Paul Revere. And that was probably Paul Revere's most important ride, honestly. because up until that point, Congress was not accomplishing much.
Right.
They didn't really trust each other. They didn't know where to go with any of this. Boston was kind of viewed as, a bunch of troublemakers, maybe they're bringing this all on. And it was Warren's resolves that brought clarity to the Continental Congress, where they voted unanimously on the resolves. And part of the resolves was to prepare their militias to be ready. So without that, you wouldn't have the unity of the Continental Congress. And without the unity of the Continental Congress, we have no idea what our history would be.
Right.
So very vital, very pivotal. And had he not done it, our history would be vastly altered. Yet we don't even know who this man was. He died at the age of 34. He had just turned 34. This man, the potential he had and what he had accomplished. But another reason that I wrote the books, and I have to say, when I did initially write the first one in 2001, I had the Mercy Scully story in there as her being betrothed.
Right. Yeah.
And because that's what the historians said all the way back to the 1850s.
Yeah.
But when her letters came out and this betrothment was expanded in the newer biographies, I got hold of the letters and read them in context. And that's what made me stand back and say, wait a minute, there's something not right with this woman.
Interesting.
And where this has gone. And even the initial, it was Loring's work in 1853, I believe, where he's the first one that says there's this betrothment, but he does not cite it whatsoever. He makes the statement, doesn't cite it. And then from there, the other biographers are citing Loring, who doesn't cite it. So it's just, and then in Carey, John Carey in 1761 or 64, in 1961, 64, he refers to a letter written to John Hancock by Mercy Scully. But even if so, before I go into that, even the Mercy Scully letters themselves make no mention whatsoever of a betrothment. Nothing in there. Okay. Now, if you look at the letter to John Hancock, he's basing this betrothment, and he takes it further with nothing to back it. He says that Warren loved Mercy Scully as much as he loved his wife. There's nothing to back that on. But if you read the letter, Mercy Scully she's trying to get Hancock to step in and get her the children. And even within this letter, she's talking about separating the children once she gets them. She wants to put the two very young boys in with a tutor, and she wants to do this. And then at the very end of the letter, she says, at least help me get the youngest one. So separate all of them. It's just not, it's not
interesting.
But she says to Hancock, I made a promise to take care of his offspring. And that's what this is based off, or a religious, that I feel bound religiously from this promise. We don't know whether when she made this promise to Warren, she says nothing about Warren's response to this promise. He might have said, no, you don't need to, we don't know. We know nothing except that she made a promise. She claimed she made a promise, and she felt religiously bound by a promise. And from that, it's taken off that she's, she's engaged to him. She's tormenting his family. Nobody's caring about what the Warren family was going through in all of this. And what's also very interesting, in this letter to Hancock, where she disparages his mother and one of his brothers harshly, this letter ends up in the Warren family papers at Massachusetts Historical Society, the original letter. The copy is in the Hancock files. So it raises the question, did Hancock give this letter to the Warrens so they could see what she was saying about them. Because shortly after this, you see Dr. John Warren, the youngest brother of Joseph Warren, obtain legal custody of these children. And both of his brothers signed as witnesses to obtaining this legal custody of the children. Wow. And it's after that that Mercy Scully has nothing to do with these children.
Interesting. Fascinating story.
It is when you dig into it. But the other thing that's come up about Warren that I'd like to touch on too, and the reason I don't understand why the contemporary biographers have decided to go in these directions. Not only this Mercy Scully, tangent, because to me, it makes Warren look like he was absolutely disrespectful to his mother in not telling her that he had this relationship, and absolutely irresponsible to his children that they ended up being in this tug of war. I mean, that's the only way you can look at it, that he kept such information from his mother and family, and then they had to go through this. But the other thing was that they, only two of them, one of the biographers and another author who wrote a book of nonfiction where Warren was the protagonist, brought out a narrative based on a small portion of a medical ledger that Joseph Warren impregnated a 13-year-old child and hid her out in Dedham. And this, that's all, they throw that out as the medical ledger is a ledger of a friend of Warren's and a colleague. They went to Harvard together, both physicians, Dr. Nathaniel Ames of Dedham. And from this medical ledger, it's listed under the name of Dr. Joseph Warren. And he lists the fact that a pregnant, unwed female was placed in his care by Warren in the beginning of April of 1775. Again, this is the exact same time when he's sending his children away from Boston. Okay. And now he's making arrangements to send this pregnant female out of Boston because he's up to his eyeballs and everything. Okay. So he sends her to Dedham. And Dr. Ames really doesn't give us much information on her. We find out her name is Sally Edwards. He lists the things he's done for her as far as medical care and things he's had to purchase. He lists her boarding. He happened to have an inn in Dedham as well, Dr. Ames did. So then we see payments are made against her account, and they are made under the name of Joseph Warren, and also under the names of two of his former apprentices, Dr. William Eustace and Dr. Townsend, again, David Townsend. Okay. And from that, just what I told you. There's nothing else here. They have come forward, these two authors, and said that this girl was 13 years old, that she was probably the Sally Edwards that would later marry Paul Revere's eldest son, Paul Revere Jr., and that in all likelihood, because Warren was making payments on the account and it was under his name, that he impregnated this 13-year-old. One of these authors actually gave an article to the Smithsonian Magazine and referred to this child as Warren's mistress. So, but they give no identity to this child other than Sally Edwards. Paul Revere would marry her later, Paul Revere Jr. But a historian has access to information. Again, keep it in the historical perspective. Could there be other reasons that this poor 13-year-old was pregnant than Warren impregnated? So in looking specifically at names, Sally Edwards in and around Boston, you have a few of them. It's not just this one girl. But that Sally Edwards, since they chose her to be the one, she was had just turned 13 years old when she got pregnant.
My goodness.
Had just turned 13. Now people have said it to me, oh, what's the big deal? Back then it was different. She wouldn't have been considered a child. No, you can find that out too.
Yeah.
In the colony of Massachusetts, you had to have guardianship until the age of 14. So legally, this girl was a child.
Yes.
So now what we're saying is Warren raped her. I mean, if you're going to follow this story through, you're saying to me, these authors, Warren raped this 13-year-old because she was underage and she couldn't consent to such an act.
Yeah.
And then if you study this Sally Edwards further, she had lost her mother 2 years prior to becoming pregnant. She had lost her father a year prior to becoming pregnant. She was the second oldest of 5 children, which were no doubt in an awful situation.
Yeah.
And step back a little further and take in the picture. This is 1775. There are 4,000 British troops in Boston.
Yeah.
Boston's on the verge of war. The turmoil, the tension, the horror, and you've got this vulnerable girl that just lost her parents. Could she have been raped by a British soldier? Could she have just been taken advantage of by somebody?
Yeah.
But no, instead we're going to take a story of a prominent, trusted physician having taken advantage of a 13-year-old and impregnated her. I mean, it's horrific that that they didn't take. And even if they wanted to put out and say this is a possibility, they gave no other circumstances that was going on.
Right. Yeah.
So, and even in the payments being made on this account, there is nothing that indicates it came out of Warren's personal monies. The family could have been paying for it. Friends could have been paying for it. Who knows? The Masonic Lodge might have been paying for it. I don't know. But
do we know what happened to the baby then?
The baby stays with Dr. Ames for a period of time. Sally leaves and goes back to Boston after the British evacuate. And the baby is with the Ameses until she's about 4 years old. And then there's no trace of her after that. But the other thing with this story is if you study Dr. Ames's ledger, Dr. Ames and Dr. Warren both took in many obstetrical patients, which was not the norm back then.
Right.
And this 13-year-old having a baby is a high-risk pregnancy.
Oh, yeah.
So Warren putting this girl into Ames's care is protecting her, being the doctor who would understand this. The other thing with Ames is if you study his journal, beyond just that one little bit, he took in many unwed women who were pregnant. He had an in. He could put them up. They're out of the sight of prying eyes and gossip and whatnot.
Interesting. Yeah.
And he also took in other patients that doctors sent to him that were pregnant. Does this mean that all these doctors got these women pregnant?
Yeah.
I mean, and this bit of defaming Warren in saying this.
Yeah.
I don't understand the reasoning behind why they would have chosen to go with that narrative.
Right. Yes.
Doesn't make him a hero.
No.
If in fact he raped this child, he's not a hero. No. So I want to try to, because I would give talks, Bob, through the years on Warren and ask people if they knew anything about him. Raise your hand, and nobody would. Yeah. But since these 2 books were published, people are raising their hands now.
Wow.
This is what has
That's
been
what they know. Yeah.
That's what they know.
Likely isn't true. Well,
not true.
Gives us a lot to think about, not only about the story, but about the way we write history and simply accept things that can't be verified.
It is, and that's scary if that's that's kind of like the news is anymore, right? Or anything we're seeing, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all you're doing to set the record straight, Janet. We've been talking with Janet Uhlar. Great book on Dr. Joseph Warren, Liberty's Martyr, as well as other books. Last time you spoke to us about Nathaniel Green, and we'll look forward to hearing more. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Buck, for all you guys are doing. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our producer, the executive director of Rev 250. He's very busy organizing events about Bunker Hill and other things. And I want to thank our listeners. We have, listeners really all over the world, and every week we thank some who are regular tuners in. And if you're in one of these places and want some Rev 250 gear, send Jonathan an email, jlane@revolution250.org. And this week I want to thank our friends in Binghamton, New York, and Towson, Maryland, Lutz, Florida, York in England, as well as New York here in the United States, Canton and Quincy here in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and Detroit, Michigan, Frankfurt in Germany, Amman, Jordan, Tel Aviv, Israel, and all places between and beyond. Thanks for joining us. And now we'll be piped out on the road to Boston.